Hey folks, I'm Aaron Tuttle. I work with Amazon Web Services on the Media Entertainment team. I just wanted to start kind of bringing this all back to sports with this quote by Enzo Ferrari. I feel like some days I am the only F1 fan in the United States, but I think what's interesting to note, there you go, second one. But I think what's interesting to note about F1 is it's the second largest global sport in the world in terms of number of viewers, and it presents a lot of challenges. And I think that, particularly the Fox conversation earlier was a great lead into this. So just a quick history of Formula One. Started in 1950. We have a half billion global fans, so big fan base. 20 drivers, 10 constructors or teams, if you will. 21 races, and those races are globally. So if you imagine what Fox was doing for the World Cup, which was already tremendously difficult, what we're talking about trying to do with F1 is to do this every 2 weeks in a different place throughout the globe. The other challenge that kind of kicked off Formula One's move towards the cloud is they were purchased by Liberty Media a couple years ago after long-time ownership by Bernie Ecclestone. And so Liberty Media really wants to drive a much more video and fan-based engagement moving forward, and that's the basis for a lot of what we're talking about today. So challenges coming into this, F1 has 68 years of content locked away. That's video and other types of media, and F1 is a very data-driven company as well. That's not. We'll have a slide later on, but essentially, each team has a mission control where they're bringing back telemetry from the cars around 200 data points that they're allowed to share, with broadcasting, and 4,000 data points beyond that. And so, how do we take this data-driven approach from just the car and the race itself and overlay that into a strategy not only for our content lake or our digital asset management system, but also how are we going to bring that data into the hands of the fans with either a second screen experience or some sort of monetized OTT or VOD platform to bring not only current races but 68 years of content into the hands of the fans. So F1 has a lot of different moving parts in this cloud transition and migration. So the obvious one I just mentioned is they have a F1 TV today, and they're going to continue to stream and bring more analytics and data into their streaming app around live races. But they also want to bring that 68 years of legacy races to the viewers as well, right? And how does machine learning and tagging of data fit into this in terms of, hey, we would love to be able to identify brands and logos and cars and race car drivers and tracks, programmatically through AI and machine learning. They want a richer viewer experience. It's something that I think F1 fans have maybe been a little critical of in the past. Is while this is being broadcast to dozens of different countries and dozens of different languages, which makes very difficult the localization experience. Fans are asking for more. They're asking for more, telemetry from the cars, data from that perspective. So they're looking to leverage machine learning there, and we're also looking really on the team side, if you will. These cars are very high tech, right? And so high performance computing is a big interest in the teams themselves. They get all this telemetry back at the end of the race. These cars, have the aerodynamic, drag of a bullet in space, right? And how do they take the data they learned from each of these races, put it through some not only machine learning, but also high performance computing to understand how the car's performing, how it can perform better, what changes they can make race to race, either from a setup perspective or a different wing setup for drag to improve the experience and the competitive nature of the sport. Cost reduction, big one we talk about in cloud all the time. Flying infrastructure around to 21 or 23 different races a year is expensive, right? So cloud is a great use case for this in terms of centralizing not only the content repository, but things like content production, video editing or visual effects on demand, the rendering side of this, the distribution of the actual OTT or VOD assets, those kinds of things. So a little voice of the customer. This was a quote from Pete Samara with the F1 team, just why they chose AWS. I think it stands for itself. I'm not going to read it to you. And this is that mission control screen we talked about previously. So the cars have, over 100 sensors on them. we're getting tons of data back, and how are we going to get that data into AWS, not only to store, but to analyze in real time? So we're going to use things like Amazon Kinesis, which is a data pipeline for both data and video data to come in, overlay directly into S3, but also be handed off to not only asset management systems or databases, but some of our programmatic API-driven AI tools, things like Amazon Recognition for driver or logo identification, and then things like Amazon SageMaker, which is our build your own AI model or machine learning model within AWS, and kind of gets you kickstarted in that, in the sense that you may not necessarily have to hire as many machine learning scientists on your team from that perspective. And I think, while we've talked a lot today on some of these different conversations about different programmatic tools that are kind of available off the shelf, whether it be from one of the cloud providers or one of the great partners that we have out here in this space. I think getting those custom models is where it really gets interesting, and I think particularly for sports as well. And coming back to things that I touched on earlier, we're, in the case of S1, changing tracks on a yearly basis. Drivers and manufacturers are changing logos, changing branding, changing out actual teams. But also, if you think about it, we've torn down a lot of stadiums, not only in the U.S., but globally over the years. So talking about, how can we use SageMaker to create a custom model that can look through, this deep archive of footage that many different teams and leagues and sports have, and be able to figure out things based on, hey, who's the player, not only tag him, but look at, where's this video, what's the stadium that it's taken in, what's the branding that's around here, maybe be able to figure out the year of the footage, or even the actual game itself, based on that, and how does that remove not only our workload of the creatives working on this media, but how does that speed us, in terms of, especially with F1, localizing this for dozens of different regions. So some of my pictures evidently didn't all come through, but either way, one of the things I think that's really important when we talk about asset management, different companies, I think, decouple these conversations, and there's no right or wrong answer, so this isn't a, my opinion is the only way to go down this road, but I think a lot of folks, when we talk about media supply chain, it's important to talk about media supply chain hand in hand with asset management or CMS kind of operations, right? So we're talking about things like, again, regionalization, localization of media, quality checking, transcoding. So we have, with our AWS Elemental team, a professional level, on-demand transcoding service, as well as a multi-screen delivery service, that can be tied into this. Metadata extraction, going back to some of the AI or ML tools, whether they're programmatic tools or whether they're custom tools that you guys have built. And the idea is, this is your media factory. And I think that what's important to understand about, when we're talking in the last couple of sessions about various moves to the cloud, is that asset management and media supply chain are the peanut butter and jelly of cloud from this perspective, right? It's very easy to start here in terms of moving your content lake, to cloud storage, in our case S3. Secondarily, move your MAM on top of that, then bring your media supply chain, and then, if you want to bring content production or distribution as well into here. Oh, evidently I had to click the button. My apologies. So anyway, just showing how we get media in and out of, say, this media supply chain or media factory in the cloud. And then the other side of that is this idea of the media content lake. So to kind of pull these different topics that AWS and F1 are working together on into one cohesive idea, we talk a lot about digital asset management and storage. And I think that today, at least in a lot of these conversations, that's become the norm or even the low-hanging fruit. When we have a direct-to-consumer model around OTT distribution or VOD, we're able to get a lot of media analytics back about who's watching, how they're watching it, how long they watch it for, if there's ads embedded, how did the ads do. And we also have this, these new technologies, that everyone has spoken about around machine learning and whatnot. So the idea that we're kind of building here is you've got your data lake and you've got your content, and these come together into a content lake, essentially. And so this slide didn't come through as appropriate, but the idea is essentially the media analytics you guys are striving for today and the asset management system, that data is relevant. And I think that there was some conversation earlier around, hey, sometimes too much data is too much. My personal opinion is that's not true. It's ensuring that we have the right tools and the right dashboards to view that data correctly and get analytics out of it. I work for Amazon. We're a data-driven company, so my opinion may not be the same as everyone else's, but I think that the power of analytics makes a lot of sense as we start talking about content storage. So my last two slides, and then we'll open it up to questions. I want to make sure we leave some time for that. But we get a lot of questions around how do people start with some of these different workloads, things like machine learning, AI, metadata extraction, and whatnot. So Amazon's built a couple of one-click deployable solutions that consume our services. These are all well architected. They're using very decoupled Amazon solutions such as Lambda, which is our serverless architecture, step functions, our media services from AWS Elemental for things like transcode, and then of course our AI services like AWS Recognition or Comprehend or even Translate from that perspective. So these one-click deployable solutions are available on our website, and they're all, not only they're one-click deployable, so you guys can either use them as a conversation starter internally, but also, if you guys want to actually test them out, they certainly will work within your Amazon account. But I think that the really interesting part about them is they're also completely documented. So a lot of teams come back and say like, hey, how do we just get started using some of this stuff? Well, we give you the code that we use to build these solutions. And so it's a great place to start having your developers pick through the code and understand, how they can start thinking about moving various parts of your all's workflow to the cloud in a way that's well architected and whatnot there. So this one is the media analysis and extraction. So obviously media assets sit in a cloud storage bucket, S3 in our case. We're going to use some different functions to essentially pull out some metadata, and that can be then put into either an AWS database or passed along to your DAM or MAM vendor of choice. Or even be, in the case of, say, a second screen kind of system, maybe that comes back into the player app and says like, oh, well, this driver or this player is so-and-so or whatnot, so that you guys can get richer information about the media you guys already have today. Then the other one is this OTT and VOD monetization quick start, right? So this is, again, maybe a version of the media supply chain we kind of talked about previously. This one kind of creating assets for an OTT or VOD distribution system. So in our case, it would be AWS and Amazon CloudFront, which is our CDN. We're using step functions and Lambda once again, as well as Elemental's Media Convert to create different multi-screen versions of say mezzanine video assets, and then prep them or even deploy them into a VOD system. And as you can see, the two different solutions can easily be combined as well if you want to start kind of mixing and matching features of the various solutions. So that is my quick take. Thank you, build on. I think we have maybe time for one or two questions.
Surely. Anybody out there want to throw something at Aaron?
Literally,
maybe to the side,
or physically. And beyond the F1 use case, if you have any, say, general AWS or cloud questions, happy to field them if I know the answer.
Quick question on metrics and utilization and so on. This came up in the last panel as well, and it was touched upon briefly. So Amazon has something called Trusted Advisor, I think, which
right.
gives you an idea of how optimized your layout is, if your infrastructure is.
Right.
Most infrastructure that you put on Amazon or any cloud vendor is declarative these days, right? You either deploy it as any production infrastructure, CloudFormation, Terraform, what have you. I'm wondering if at some point this will become a platform level feature where you have workload level analysis, not just from an initial state, but from a steady state of operation where Amazon or dollar cloud vendor says your workflows could be improved if you do this, that, and the other based on an online analysis of your operations.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Trusted Advisor is a tool we have in AWS today that kind of dive into, what's your spend, how to optimize your spend, where you may have security issues that you want to address and whatnot there. But to your point, yeah, for sure. A lot of folks are using, say, third-party log analyzation tools, like Splunk or whatnot, to build their own custom dashboards to completely understand not just what's the spend within the account, but maybe to your point, how much is it costing us, per hour or per piece of media or whatever the case may be to process that. And then the other side of that is we have a program internal to AWS that we work with customers on called the well-architected review. So just like our solutions that I mentioned are well-architected, you would go back through your account team, your account manager, and your account SA and ask them to do a well-architected review on a project you built on AWS, and we would look at it not only to ensure that it's well-architected, it's deployed in the way that is most fiscally conservative, if you will, and also that it's well-architected for things like scaling, DR, or security from that perspective.